Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox recording here with a fun experiment. Reamping through an old Crate GFX 65 solid state practice amp. Now, I'm a huge fan of reamping through tube heads with a nice cab like something like a Mesa Boogie oversized 4x12. I'm also a fan of using amp sims with a solid impulse response. But with that being said, I've actually never tried reamping and trying to get a usable tone out of a super cheap solid state practice amp, and I feel like it would be a fun experiment. And the actual amp that I'm using today is the same amp I owned in high school that was just a practice amp that I had in my bedroom. Now, as a teenager, I actually really liked the tone of this amp, so let's see how it stacks up in a modern day production in a real world context. Now for the experiment, I'm gonna be keeping it super simple. I'm gonna be reamping 2 rhythm DI tracks through the practice amp and miking it with an SM57. I'm also gonna try overdriving the input with a tube screamer to see if that helps tighten up the tone. Also, I haven't reamped through a solid state amp in years. I prefer tube heads or amp sims, so I'm curious to know what this is gonna end up sounding like. Okay, so here we are within my DAW. So as you can see here, I have 2 DI tracks. Both are just clean DIs that were recorded straight into my interface, which I then routed through the Crate practice amp, and I tried 3 different mic placements. And just to show you what the DI sounded like on their own, let's take a listen. So as you can tell, they are just clean DI recordings of the guitar itself. Again, what I did was I took each one of these, sent them through my reamp box, in through the front end of my Crate practice amp, and re-recorded the tone of the Crate through an SM57 back into my DAW. And these 3 groups of tracks are my 3 different mic placements. So with that being said, let's hear mic placement number 1. Okay, in my opinion, not that great. Little fizzy, little bright. It's not absolutely terrible, but I would never use this within a pro level mix. That's just me. Now, I started out with my go-to mic placement, which is when the SM57 is pretty close to the center of the cone and about 1/2 inch to 1 inch away from the grill. Now, in general, the closer you point your mic to the center of the cone, the brighter your tone will be. And in this case, the tone is just way too bright in my opinion. So in order to combat this, I tried a second mic placement where I took the mic and placed it a little further out toward the edge of the cone, somewhere between the center of the cone and the edge of the cone. Again, my goal was to just darken up the tone to see if I can avoid some of that excess fizz. So with that being said, let's listen to mic placement number 2. Okay, well, it's better in that it's not as fizzy as the first mic placement, but now it's overly dark and muddy sounding. So in order to combat this, I tried a third mic placement, which was sort of in between the original mic placement and the second mic placement. So I placed the mic a little closer to the center of the cone, but not as close to the center as the original mic placement. And let's see how that one turned out. Okay, in my opinion, between all 3, that one is by far the best one. It's a little more focused in the mids, has a little less fizz than the original, and a little more clarity than the second mic placement. For me, it's got sort of like a Dimebag Daryl sort of quality, which can be a good thing depending on the production I'm going for. Me personally, I'm usually more of a fan of a warmer tube sound, whether it's a real tube amp or an amp sim, but this isn't a terrible tone. All out of a cheapo, outdated practice amp from the 90s. Oh, I also want to mention this as far as processing on the tracks. The only EQ I have is a roll-off below 70 Hertz and a roll-off above 10K. No EQ at all. So these guitars have no EQ, no tone shaping going on in post-production in order to fit them into the mix. I just recorded them straight into my interface and I wanted to hear the bare tone just to see how it stands on its own. This same EQ I have on every single track. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna play the sample back and I'm gonna quickly switch between all three mic placements just so you can hear how drastic of an effect mic placement has on guitar tone, even when you're miking a small practice amp. So I'm gonna start off with number 1, then I'll switch it to number 2, and then finally to number 3, which in my opinion is the most usable one. Let's check it out. So as you can tell, subtle adjustments in mic placement make a massive difference when it comes to dialing in a metal guitar tone or hard rock guitar tone at the source. And the tone you have at the source is everything. For example, the muddiness of this second tone is a lost cause. I'd rather use an amp sim with a proper impulse response than this tone any day. But like I showed you in this video, it was easy for me to change at the source by just moving my mic slightly more towards the center of the cone. So there you have it, a guitar tone reamped through a cheapo, old solid state Crate practice amp. I don't even think Crate exists anymore. I would love to hear your opinion. What do you think of this tone? Is it usable? Is it crap? Would you use this in your production? Or is this just further proof that you need to either use a tube head or a great sounding amp sim? Leave a comment in the comment section below and let me know your opinion. I'd love to hear it. If you found this video helpful or entertaining, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. You can both like and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description below. And be sure to download my free impulse response of my favorite Mesa Boogie cab out of my studio with V30 speakers. There's a link below in this video's description where you could download the impulse response for absolutely free. Download it, load it into your amp sim, plug it to get right to dialing in killer metal guitar tone with absolute ease. Until next time, happy recording.